Well, thank you. Just the formal bit at the beginning. Welcome everyone. My name's Colin Newbrook. I work for an organisation called learningSkills. We're Gateshead Council's adult learning, but we do a number of other things as well. Basically, we're going to go through some hybrid delivery, and I'll go on a bit more about what that means in a minute. A little bit about us, just to give you an idea of where we're coming from. We are Gateshead Council's training provider. We are the training provider part of the council. We deliver adult and community learning, FE, LDD and SEND provision, youth education, family learning, vocational learning, functional skills, ESOL. We've got quite a few areas that we deliver in. We're the second largest provider of apprenticeships in the UK as well. I don't know the first, I'm sorry. We have been a customer of Google Education back when it was called G Suite since 2018. Like many other providers though, and I'm sure this rings true pretty much everywhere, the vast majority of the learning that we've done has happened since March last year. We had classes with Google Classrooms that were used, alongside as a blended learning tool with some of the tutors. There was some who were using it, some who weren't, etc. Obviously, March last year changed a lot of things for a lot of people. We ended up pretty much going full pelt with Google Classroom, with Google Meet, with a lot of the G Suite tools at the time. And within a month, we had 100 classes running, which we were very proud of at the time. We managed to engage the vast majority of our learners the second half of last year, which was quite challenging. I think we were getting confident over the summer as well, because we had some courses running over the summer. And from the beginning of this academic year, we've started running hybrid learning models, hybrid delivery. So what I mean by that is hybrid delivery is when you're teaching in the classroom with learners in class and remotely at the same time. So you may have Google Meet or Zoom or Teams or one of the other video call services, and you have learners live in the room and it's teaching simultaneously. That's different to blended learning. Blended learning is very much, as you may know, is a tool. It's using the tools, so it might be setting work to do outside of the classroom using the digital services, which is what we did prior to lockdown, really. Things like Google Classroom and things they would use in addition to the in-class resources and not together with them. Synchronous learning is another term that I've had to pick up over the last 12 months. Teaching and learning occurring simultaneously. That's what we're talking about today as well. Teaching and learning happening at the same time, as opposed to asynchronous, where the learners are accessing at their own time and at their own pace. So there's just some key terms. Now, what I'll do is when we did this, just to give you an idea, we actually looked at a few different models of hybrid learning, which one might work. I'm going to go through four main ones that we've kind of discovered over the last year. First of all, model one, everyone on a device. Can you see that? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so you've got your teacher with a device, you've got learners in the classroom with a device, and you've got learners in their own individual rooms at home or what have you with a device each. That's the one that we've tended to use the most over the last sort of 12 months or so. So basically everyone's together. What you've then got with that is you've got the likes of the learners all connecting to possibly Google Meet at the same time in the same room. So be very careful with things like muting microphones if you're doing that, because that can cause a problem. But it does provide you with a level playing field, because what it means is everyone's got access to the same resources, which is one of the reasons why we've been quite happy to use that model. The next model is where you have learners connecting in the classroom without a device, and then other learners connecting with their own devices in their own, own homes. Obviously, you make sure your camera, that's a little camera there, it's not a turret. That camera is, viewing everyone, so all the learners at home can see what's happening. The big thing with this one is you have to think about what resources you use, because you might find that learners in the class are using paper-based resources, learners at home are using digital-based resources to sort of match it. So it's almost like planning for two different types of, two different sets of resources for each task. Also, learners in here, I'll put Amelia as a pointer. Learners here can't necessarily hear these guys, and vice versa as well. So you have to think about how you're actually presenting that information. You've got model 3, 2 groups, 2 rooms, 2 devices. So you might have, maybe social distancing, for example. You might have to have two two separate classrooms. One is unmanned with the teacher, but has a camera on them. The other has the teacher in the room with another camera. This can allow the teacher to manage all the conversations, can see everyone, the cameras viewing everyone, but it does, I think, with this one, lend itself to be a little bit distraction orientated. You might find that learners in the other room might be a bit more distracted than those that the teacher's got full control over almost in the classroom, if that makes sense. Model 4, this is by far the hardest. It's almost like the worst of both worlds. You've got learners all together with devices in one room. In another room, they haven't got a device, they've just got a camera on them. Again, you have to plan different resources. You may have to rely on more discussion-based tasks. That could work quite well for a speaking and listening exam, for example, but possibly not for much. Well, there might be reasons for it, but for me, I find it quite a challenging one to use. We as actually, I'll tell you that in a minute. What I've done is I've put a QR code. Did you know that you can do this on Chrome? You can QR code almost any website. Basically, I'll happily show you this because it's one of the things that what's good about if you've got a presentation on with your learners and you're in a classroom, you put a QR code. All the learner's got to do is take the phone, snap the QR code, and then they can actually access the site. To get the QR code, basically any site on Google, if you're using Google Chrome, if you click on the actual URL, there's a little square here. If you click on that, it gives you the QR code there, and you can download that, upload it to any PowerPoint. It's for me, it's it's great. You can, for example, what I could do is I WhatsApped this PowerPoint to a colleague of mine about 4 hours ago. What I did was, rather than copy the link in my phone, I just snapped it, used the published site, and then WhatsApped it over, and they were able to access it. So it's a very handy little tool to have, where you can just click on the QR code icon there. Have you seen that before? Or is that? Oh,
I've never noticed that before. That's really handy. Thank you.
Oh, it's all right. That's why I'm doing it. Yeah, it's what I do is I put them on the website on the PowerPoint, so the learners in the classroom can snap it. They've got it. The learners at home can access it either by using it on the screen or by clicking on the link on the PowerPoint link I've got here as well. What I was going to do is I was going to do a task. Now I think we can still do this task. Basically, I'll put the Jamboard link, or you can do exactly what we've just done there and click on the actual QR code. I'm going to give you I'm going to put this in the chat. And it's basically just, again, it's just more of an example to show you how you may use like Jamboard as almost like a virtual flip chart or a virtual worksheet. I know you may or may not have used Jamboard lots before in the past, but what I'd like you to do is I put the 4 models on there. If you can just get a sticky note, and in the sticky note, just stick a note on which one of these 4 models might be more suitable for your style of delivery, and say what the advantages might be. So you might click on a sticky note and say, this lets all learners use the same resource, and just put it on where you want it to be. So you might want to put it on there, for example, that sort of thing. So just have a play. Stuart and Andrew, please, again. Which have you got access to that? Is that working? Yes, it is. Brilliant. Yeah, 1-to-1 is the ideal scenario in most classes, if you can get that.
I was going to say, instead of paying all this money to these organisations now, the government need to ensure that every student has a Chromebook of some sort.
Yeah.
So much better.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think, yeah, thank you very much. This was basic to show you that Jamboard can be used for this. What I did was I created the background as a static image, and I use that to set the background, so you can't accidentally move this. However, you can add your things on it as well. So it's just using Jamboard as I use it as virtual flip chart paper. Whenever I in the classroom would pull a flip chart paper and get people to mind map and do things on a poster, do it on flip chart. I find that one of the tips I'll bring out in a bit is that a lot of our teachers use Jamboard now instead of smartboard software. So rather than using the smartboard software you normally get with your smartboard, because that doesn't actually communicate to to people at home, whereas you write on a Jamboard, the pen will write and everyone can view it at home. I didn't realize until this year you can't view smartboard pens written on smartboard software on a shared screen.
Oh, I didn't realise.
It's because the technology is built into the actual board, not the actual software side. If that makes sense. So like
that's worth knowing.
Yeah. So you might as well be writing on a clear screen in front of the board. You know, people in the room can see it, but people connecting to the shared screen can't. So to Jamboard removed that. Obviously we're able to do that now, so that's great. And there's some great feedback there. Brilliant, excellent. I'll go back to the presentation just because it's just so we can quickly go through it again. So excellent. Our approach was what we decided what worked best for us was either one or two, depending on devices. One preferably because you can plan one set of resources, Jamboard for example, and everyone can use it, or Google Docs, and people can communicate, collaborate between each other on projects. Even Google Meet, just providing that you turn the volume and the mic off on the in the classroom, and have just the teachers speakers reducing the volume. Otherwise you get the horrible feedback which no one wants to hear. The vast majority of our lessons at the minute as we speak are ran using Model 1 or Model 2, where we've got learners on phones if possible, because again a lot of the Google apps you can use on your phone, and they don't lose their edge if you've got a reasonably sized phone, anyway that is, obviously we do run the risk of running into that digital poverty thing where some learners may not have a phone, etc., and it might be a different challenge, but we haven't come across that as big as we possibly could have, or as much as we possibly could have. But really, I mean, that's our main tools that we normally use. One of the things I want to show you is another Jamboard, and I'm going to show you this as from our maths teachers because it was a really great idea. She was able to teach angles. Now, I haven't taught angles in a long time, and I haven't done it. I haven't had a protractor in my hand for many years, but I remember them being very fiddly, especially having all these learners with protractors everywhere, and you'd always lose some, and some would snap, and all this. What my colleague's done is a protractors lesson, an angles lesson on Google Meet, and what they've done is I'll put that link in again for you, so you've got it in the chat.
Fantastic.
Using transparent resources, you can actually just use the protractor as if it was a piece of paper, and you can actually, and she's got these excellent ways of being able to use these, and you can move them, and you can actually measure up and get the right angle perfectly. And it's having a transparent resource. And I didn't know this, but when you Google image search, if you were to type in the word protractor in Google image search, you can actually go to the tools, and where it says color, you can change it to transparent, and you can get your transparent resources. So she did the same with a ruler in a line of best fit, where she was able to have these transparent rulers, and learners were putting the line of best fit in there in graphs and showing where it should be. But it meant that the learners in the class and the learners outside of the class were doing the same, had the exact same opportunity to succeed, using the exact same resources. That she could, if she wanted to have a box of protractors and paper if she wanted as a backup, but the learners were able to complete the same task. And that was a great example of being able to actually just think about, well, what do I want the learners to do? How can I change that online so that everyone can use it? So for me, it worked incredibly well. And I mean, I've been looking at it as well. I've been spending a bit of time playing with this because I love the stuff. It's rotating the protractors and all sorts. But the only thing you can't do is snap them, which is probably possibly a benefit. So yeah. One thing I was going to show you as well, and I'll show you, I don't expect you to do this, but I'll just show you something that we do, is we've moved from PowerPoint to Google Slides for a number of reasons. One, all learners can access them. Two, you can publish them on a website, which will allow you to just send a link, and learners can click through them, which I'll give you the link to this one at the end. But one of the best things I've discovered, which I really like, is I think I'm going to have to make sure that I am doing this properly. Open speaker notes. You can get speaker notes. Have you seen this on Google Slides? One of the best bits about this, I think, is the audience tools.
Yeah.
I've seen it, but I've not used it, so I'm quite keen to see what you've done with it.
What's brilliant now, this is if you're in a classroom full of people, or I mean, I would love to have had this when I've done like things in halls in the past where I've had hundreds of people in lecture theatres and stuff. Basically, you got audience tools, start new. Make sure I change that so it's anyone can access these. And it's on. Now, what will happen here is the top of my PowerPoint will have a ask questions at, and it's a very short link. Now, you can use your phones or use your PCs to type that link in. And what it'll do is it'll give you a little chat box, not too different to what you get on Google Meet. But imagine if you're in a classroom live, then you can have your phone out, you can be typing this in, and it'll allow you to ask questions to the person presenting. Now, for me, I think this is a great idea. I mean, I've asked the question there, said what potential challenges might you experience when you deliver a hybrid class? So if you want, click on, go on that link, use your phones or just type it into a web browser. And if you, as you put a suggestion in there, it will pop up here. And I'll normally have this off screen. I'll normally have it on my second screen, but I'm putting it on here just to show you. So it means that if any learner puts an inappropriate thing in, you can, they don't get, you can filter out the ones that you want to filter out. You can upvote and downvote them as well. So what you can do is if you've got 20 learners and one asks a question, other people can like upvote it to say that it's a, yes, we want to know the answer to this.
I'm having a trouble getting to it. I think I might have typed it in wrong.
So it's slides.app.goo.gl and then /, and you've got it's case sensitive. You've got to have two lowercase w's and then uppercase RLK.
Let me put it in the chat what I've typed in and just see if I've done it wrong. Oh, I've missed the L in slides. Sorry.
There we go. Are you in?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So what you've seen is, Andrew and Stuart have both, asked me questions thanks to our review. Now what you can do is, I'll get this on my other screen. So what I would normally do is have this off screen, so you would just see that. But what I can do is, if I wanted to, say Andrew's asking me a really, really good question there, I can present that. Now if I click the present button, what it'll do is it'll put it on the active screen there. So I can now say, well, actually, Andrew's asked this question. You can then address the whole class. Now, obviously, you can do that from Google Meet, or you can do it from within the classroom itself. So again, it's leveling that playing field a little bit. So those who are online and offline are able to partake in the same question answers, rather than having some people shouting at the back of a class, but the people online can't hear them and shouting over them, and having that kind of mix match of it. No, it's formalizing questioning, which works quite well. Likewise, what you can do is, like I said, people can upvote or downvote these questions as well. All these questions get saved within the Google slide. So if you were to share the slide at a later date, all the questions will be in there as well, and they'll be saved on the slide that they've been asked. So you can use that as a sort of a tool to go back to and have that. So for me, it's like the idea of having the chat window in Google Meet, but live in person, where they can just do it on a phone. I think for me, it's a great tool that a lot of learners are using now as a way of being able to have that sort of equal playing field.
I would say with that as well, Carl, when that first came out, I was teaching a year 8 group of special needs kids.
Yeah.
And these kids would never ever ask any questions. And as a starter, I did a slideshow with a bit of an introduction for 5 minutes. It was supposed to be 5 minutes. The questions they were coming up with took the whole of an hour.
Yeah.
Because they were not scared to ask the questions, because they were typing it in there. And some of the questions you would not believe from that group.
Yeah.
Because as far as you're concerned, they were low ability, they weren't very skilled at it, but they're actually quite deep thinking about the things they were thinking about.
Anonymous as well. I mean, I know your names came up there, but you can actually make those questions anonymous. So learners don't have to feel the exposure of asking a question. And even then, the confidence boost of having the peers upvote a question, if it's a good question, can be quite positive as well. So it's a really useful tool, and it's one that can be shared both on and offline at the same time. I'll do a little bit of me. I know you've probably seen my voice by now, but I'll go through a few things at the minute. These are some of the findings from my team.
Carl,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
You might have covered this already, and I apologise for just walking off. Then I won't bore you with the whole story, but with regards to that URL, did I see, was that a QR code you had?
Yes. Before this one.
Yeah. So could we use a QR code on the presentation?
Yeah. On Google Chrome, if you're using Google Chrome as a browser, any URL that you can click on. If you go onto the address bar at the top, see there's a little square here.
Yes.
Click on that square, will give you a QR code for any URL that you want to use. So whether it's a PowerPoint, like a Google slide, whether it's a Jamboard, whether it's an actual web link of a research site that you want them to research, you can download it, put it on the on your PowerPoint. Learners in the classroom can get it, or just take a photograph of it and access it. Learners at home can do the same. It's just another way of sharing a link, which I find it's the only way I share links these days. I think it's brilliant, and they'll come with a little funky dinosaur in the middle as well, which is always good. A few challenges that were raised by my teams that I would make sure that I would definitely think about if you're doing some hybrid teaching. Classroom management is easier said than done with hybrid teaching. One of the things I discovered very early on is basically learners being aware of learners being online and not doing anything. And I think one of the things that one of my team mentioned was have quizzes, have those things that might be, or even questions to fire out at learners who are able to do stuff when there's a bit of dead time, which I think is important. Because when you've got lots online as well, it's difficult to monitor everyone at once. Now, I think what one of my colleagues mentioned is having Google Docs as a way of providing work. So you can actually click on all the Google Docs in real time, mark, not so much mark, but assess in class, do a little bit of your formative assessment that way. One of the discussions I was having with Stuart just before this session was intermittent internet as well. When internet cuts out, always have a plan B or a plan C. Prepare tasks that learners can complete in case of a dropped connection. It might be that the internet kicks out halfway through the session and you're left with learners not being able to connect online, from their end. Consider tethering to your mobile if that's an option. Tethering, if you're able to tether, do that. Thanks, Helen. In some cases as well, if you have lost your online learners, it's happened to me before, where you think, oh God, no, I've got half an hour before my end of the lesson and these learners have gone. Don't panic. You can catch up with those learners after. The learners are understanding that internet can be on and off and things, and they'll know there's problems. You can catch up with them after the session. You can give them the resources. Hopefully you've recorded the session, which will be able to help them, etc. So don't just have which is easier said than done, have that kind of panic and meltdown and go, which we're all tempted to do. Audio is a huge issue as well, making sure everyone can hear. One of my colleagues paraphrases questions if she's got, and I'm aware that you put your hand up, I'll be 2 seconds. When she's doing this model here, where all these learners are in one room and you've got some connected devices, paraphrasing, if this guy here at the back asks a question, paraphrasing that question so that these guys can hear it online, and being aware that you might have to do that a little bit, just to make sure everyone can hear. And also, I've already mentioned, but with Google Meet, if people are connecting Google Meet in the same room, no problem doing that, but make sure the volume's down and the mics are turned mute. Otherwise, you'll get horrible feedback, and it's awful. If you haven't heard it, it's really bad. Tara, you've raised your hand. You got a question about any of that?
It was more to do with, do you have any learners that kind of refuse to switch their cameras on?
Right.
And do you have any like solutions or ways that you handle that? Because sometimes it can be, it's just where they are at home and they don't want everybody to see what's in the background, or they've got things going on, kind of thing.
I think I mean it all depends on the policy in your organisation. Now, a lot of things like turning cameras on, having things on mute, raising your hand can often be covered in the expectations. And one of the things I would definitely recommend is you might have had this class all year, and all of a sudden you're moving to hybrid learning. Use that as a time to reevaluate the expectations and renegotiate them. And it might be that you're happy for learners to have cameras off as long as they check it in verbally. It might be that you want them to have the cameras on. If that's the case, as long as you sort of set those expectations and what you expect, and also give them the opportunity to like blur backgrounds as well and things. So it's just and things that way. If that is a barrier, provide those solutions. It might be though that some learners just have their initials, and you can every so often check in and make sure they're still listening. It all depends on your local policies, and your local and how you manage that. But again, it's I suppose it's no different to any other expectation that you would do in your actual classroom delivery. Don't eat crisps in your lesson and things like that. It's all about what rules you set. But I would definitely say that if nothing else, moving from one way of teaching to another, one delivery model, whether it's online to offline to hybrid to fully or back in the classroom or anything, reestablish those expectations. Do your class contracts again, go back to that, what is expected and what isn't, because you've changed the rules a little bit for them. So it's just reestablish those rules so there's no questions. Same goes from an organizational point of view. I mean, within 2 weeks of lockdown, myself and some of the management team had to then go back and look at what was acceptable Zoom policy or Teams policy or Meet policy, because you had people turning up with the Zoom shirts and then their pajama bottoms on and things like that, and it's basically how you manage that. It's a rule shift. Does that answer your question? That's all right. My team have also given me 9 top tips for what they found a successful hybrid delivery. Now, I think this is really quite nice because they're not too complicated as well. They make sense, which I think is the best thing you can do with tips. The first one by country mile is be aware of where you're positioned. It's very different to standing up in front of a classroom when you've got people connected online, because you need to make sure the camera is where it needs to be. I found when I did this, the first thing I did, I discovered I was delivering a whole session to the class in the room, and everyone connected online could just see me bald spot, and that was all they could see. I should have painted a face on it or something, because that's all they were looking at. And I realized I was turning around it because the camera's facing. What I think seems to work quite well is having the teacher in front of a screen with the camera on the screen, and these guys can see. Alternatively, what you can do with Google Meet is you can have 2 cameras, or more than 2, as many cameras as you want, and you can toggle between them. So you could, in effect, have a camera on yourself, have a camera on the learners, have a camera on the board, and using Google Meet, you can actually toggle between these by going into your settings and just changing the camera. When you test the camera out at the beginning of a meet, and to make sure it's working, you can do that, and you can just toggle between the 3 cameras or 2 cameras or what have you. We found this works really well when we've been teaching things like cookery classes, because what you were doing is you'd have a camera on the pot or whatever, the pan, whatever it is cooking, and a camera on the teacher doing the exposition, and then goes back. So you can that works really well. Sorry, Tara, you said is that about owl cameras? I've never heard of those.
Yeah, they're.
Are they the ones that move, Tara?
Yeah,
because we've got them at Croydon, and I haven't actually used them in a session yet, but I'm going for some training on Thursday. I'm hoping we might get to try them out there. They've bought them in, thankfully, it's the building that I happen to teach in, and they've got a few of them. And I was thinking that might be quite good for hybrid classrooms, but it's trying to work out how to use them, and whether you have, like an additional camera, as Carl said. But this is supposed to like turn when somebody speaks. We've got those. I haven't used them yet properly.
That would be a great things like that, to make sure that you think these things through as well before running. I think that's the second point. Prepare your equipment. If you're using multiple cameras, brilliant, or the owl camera. Do you move the webcam to face the other learners, or do you face teacher, or do you use a headset like I've got on now? Again, first mistake I made teaching an online class, I wore this headset, which is lovely. You know, it's great. It's a computer gaming headset, so I can hear you perfectly clear. However, I was delivering and I discovered that no one else in the classroom could hear the learners online except me. So I was having to then reiterate what was being said online to those and vice versa, because I discovered I was actually keeping myself in a little ecosystem here with the headphones and the microphone. No one else could hear. So again, be aware of things like this and do try. And the best thing you can do is do a trial run. And you know, if you've got time before you do your first session, get a few colleagues to connect on the laptops or on the desktop PCs from the office while you go in the classroom, and make sure I have a few people in with you, and just make sure everything works as a sort of dry run for 10 minutes, just so that just so you've got everything working, so you don't have these issues when your learners come in. Number 3, plan for your learners' contributions. I mentioned this very briefly earlier. To avoid people talking over each other, you know, rotate questioning, minimize open questions, use the hand functionality. I mean, the thing about the raising hand, Meet, Teams, Zoom all have it, and learners in the actual classroom can physically raise the hand as well. And at least that way, you're meeting in the middle with, you know, with one of these ways of communication, which is what we need to be doing. Sorry, Helen. Phil from Croydon came to the last session. All right.
Yeah, he was the one who kind of got us involved in the cameras and stuff. So
yeah.
I'm hoping if he comes to the next one, then, you know, we could maybe ask him a bit more about those. So
definitely, that'd be brilliant. Number 4, be consistent with your approach. One of the things that we found that was massively disruptive was changing everything every week. Because, we'll try this next week. If it doesn't work first time, give it another shot. For example, a lot of people move from Meet to Teams to Zoom, back again to Meet, and learners will find it very difficult. Try and keep with the same sort of system. Same goes with communication methods with submitting assignments. If you're going to do them on Google Classroom, do them on Google Classroom. Don't do one-on-one and then one on something else and then have one email to you. Just because what you end up finding is that it becomes very disjointed and it lowers the engagement a little bit. Try and keep everything as you can, as consistent as possible. That's not to say you can't bring in a Kahoot quiz or bring in something additional every so often, but try and keep the sessions as you know, as predictable as you can get it in terms of technology used. And prepare the learners, you know, as I said before, looking at the expectations, review the expectations. You know, it might be things like having the learners speak up so that others can hear, that sort of thing. Just being aware of that. Use pedagogies and resources that can use consistently by learners. So what's what we've been doing today, things like using Jamboard rather than flip chart paper. Try and use like Google Forms as worksheets, screen sharing with Google Slides, etc. Just to try and make it so that everyone can see the same thing. Whether you're in or outside the class, you can, if you want to make it hard for yourself, plan resources for those in the class and those for those virtually, but you'll find yourself planning double the amount of work. If you can try and bring it all together, and if learners can, even if learners have a phone they can access Google Form on, it doesn't have to be every resource, but you know, if you've got a Google Form that you can access both on and offline, you're a bit of a winner. You're not adding those extra resources, you're not adding those extra time for planning. Use resources that can be used at home. I've talked a lot about Google at the minute, but things like Word and Excel, not all learners have bespoke packages at home, whereas everyone can access Google, you know, Google Docs, Google Sheets. The QR codes for me is a game changer. You put QR codes everywhere, and learners can just use. You don't need. I didn't know this until recently as well. You don't need a specific app to get QR codes. You used to back in a few years ago. Now your camera app on an iPhone or an Android phone will automatically pick up the QR code and take you to the site. You'd have to click on it'll bring up the URL, you click on it and takes you to the site, but you don't actually need a specific QR code app. Make efforts to get everyone involved. That from a quality perspective was the biggest thing that I found. Learn interaction. Make sure that you make the efforts to do that, especially for those who are connecting on their own at home. What the guidance I often give my staff was, learners, normally you'd come to a lesson, you'd be like, right, everyone, let's start, bam, 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 bam. When you've got online learners, anyone connecting online, whether it's all of them or whether it's only a few, make sure that these learners, you have a bit of an icebreaker with them, have a bit of a chat with them, how they're doing, did you watch the TV last night, whatever, just to get that little bit of rapport going, because they don't have that anywhere else. with the class if they're online. You know, they can't do it during break times and things. Give them that little bit of that bit of leeway, a bit of freedom. One of my staff, one of the teachers that I work with, what she does as well is, because she's a 2-hour session, and she's discovered that learners don't like being online for 2 hours at a time, she sets the final task, and then the learners online go at half an hour before the session or 45 minutes before the session, work on the task and then submit it externally. And it just means that she then has the last 45 minutes of the lesson where the learner's on Meet. She hasn't got to juggle between the two, and the learners get on with the work and then submit it. And as long as she gets that submission by the end of the day, she's not bothered, you know, whether they've actually been off that. And it's just because, again, you're reducing that screen time a little bit, which makes it a bit, you know, a bit more enjoyable for them. And lastly, you know, record the session where you can, you know, with the learner's permission, just so they can watch it back, just like we're recording this one today. You know, sometimes there's loads you go through. One of the things that we can do now that we couldn't do, you know, a few years ago, is have a record of all the sessions that you've ever delivered ready for learners to revise from, to use, you know, utilize that tool and store it on the VLE, the Google Classroom, whatever that you're using, so that they've actually got it and they can actually go back to it. And that is the end of what I've got to say. So thanks for listening. If you have any questions that I haven't answered already, let us know. Feel free to email me as well. You know, there's my website, there's my email address on the page. Happy to answer any questions and have any discussions about this as well in the future. Just give me a shout. You know, and again, just a disclaimer: we're only a provider that's only started using this the way we're using it about a year ago as well. So we're still learning and we're still picking things up. So I'm happy to share advice or, you know, receive advice as well. You know, if you think owl cameras are something I'm definitely going to look into as well, because that could be a game changer for us. So yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you. That's been really helpful.
Good, thank you.
Carl,